We have an audiobook launch and also a discussion on The Princess and the Political Agent, presenting the Penguin 35th Anniversary Collector's Edition of The Princess and the Political Agent, the English translation by L. Somiroy of Binodini's Sahitya Award-winning historical novel Boro Saheb Ongbi Sanatombi, and its audiobook read by the translator. Today we have among us our discussant, Dr. Susma Gurumayum, PhD, who is currently a assistant professor at Tamenglong College, and Sir Somi Roy, who is the festival director. They will be heading the panel.
Good evening. Coming on the stage after that goosebumps-inducing performance and sharing the stage with Mr. L. Somi Roy, whom I also call Tamo Somi, is very humbling, but here goes. I would like to start with the fact that I was gifted this copy, 35th year's collector's edition of The Princess and the Political Agent, by Sahitya Academy winning Binodini, translated by Mr. Somi Roy. I have the original copy also. This is the original one, and I just got it signed today. I'm very happy about it. And today we also have the launch of the Audible version of this book, recited by Mr. L. Somi Roy. So let's start from the beginning, Tamo. When was the first time that you read Bor Saheb Ongbi Sanatombi?
Now that you've put me on the spot, let me take a little breather and say thank you very much to Guru Sangyusang Onganer for that beautiful song. Always treasure it. Thank you, Santila. And thank you, Sushma, for joining me. I've always admired your interest in literature, your passion and your own writing. I'm very buoyed by the younger generation of Manipuris who are now, especially young women, big fans of Binodini.
Yeah, yes,
Binodini,
yes,
whom they
yes.
never met, many of them, because she died 10 years ago. So, in my own turn, as a young person, Sanatombi, this book, Boro Saheb Ongbi Sanatombi, was all around me, all the time. I heard many of the anecdotes. I heard many versions in snippets. And I was very young. And people like Iche Yankom Roma, who lived next door, who was a very favored young lady, and my mother didn't have any daughters, and she was always loved smart young women. She would have loved you.
I'm sure.
She used to share, and she had very idiosyncratic writing. Very beautiful, almost calligraphic, but very hard to read. There are only about 3 or 4 people in Manipur who can read her handwriting. Mm-hmm. And so she wrote in longhand in the Bangla script. And it's only a few people that she had who could copy it, make a fair copy of her manuscripts.
Okay, so?
So, in the fringes of this, because I was in college when, I think it was a freshman year in college, when Boro Saheb Ongbi Sanatombi came out, and I realized that I hadn't actually read it. It was so much around our house all the time. It was a book 10 years in the making, so I didn't read it until I started translating it.
All right.
But I felt I knew the book because I'd heard it over and over again, all the incidents, right?
Okay, Tamo. Yeah.
So it's kind of a weird way of approaching a work of literature.
So when you first read it, which was after the book released, long after the book released. How did you read it as a descendant of the royal family, as a son, as a reader, or as a translator?
As a slave to Penguin.
As a slave to Penguin. All right, that's the very practical answer.
What happened was that Namita Gokhale, who's the founder and co-director of the Jaipur Literature Festival, which had presented my previous translation called The Maharaja's Household, and we became friends. And she was in a taxi in Kochi, at the Kochi Literature Festival with Mansi Subramaniam, who is the commissioning editor. And I just happened to call Namita at the time for something, and they got talking, and Mansi overheard what she and I were talking about, and I said, I'm working on, I want to do a translation. See, the translation of Boro Sahib Ongbi Sanatombi, the name of the book in Manipuri, has been in the making for a very long time. I started it in the 1970s. My mother wanted me to do it, and I started it, and I couldn't do it. I failed. And then my mother gave me some people's translations saying she didn't like them, and she never again asked me to translate it. By that time, I was already living in New York, and she came to visit me, and she brought a translation by someone else, and she said, she shrugged her shoulders. But that was her way of telling me that not to forget translating this book.
Yes, sir, yes.
So the title, The Princess and the Political Agent, I had already decided upon it in the 1970s.
1970s.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mentioned that I have this project called The Princess and the Political Agent, and Namita Gokhale said, yes, I know this book will succeed just by the title, The Princess and the Political Agent.
Okay.
She said, I have a nose for these things. I can feel these things. So she immediately talked to Mansi Subramaniam, who was the commissioning editor from Penguin, and they were attending the Kochi Lit Fest together. And boom, I got it.
It happened.
They said it happened immediately at the backseat of a cab.
Yeah. So when the title of the book in Manipuri is Boro Sahib Ongbi Sanatombi, so when you literally translate it, it doesn't translate to the princess and the political agent. It translates to Sanatombi, the wife. Yeah.
Of the big Sahib.
Big Sahib.
Yeah.
So you never thought of giving the title of the book?
Translation is never literal. You have to. It becomes a new thing in itself after a while. At one level, it's a betrayal. In Italian, we say traditore. Traditore means translator, traitor. You're betraying the text. At the same time, the book begins to exist on its own in the target language, right? So after a while, you have to let it go. You have no control over everything.
That's true. Yeah.
And the point is the target language is English, and the reader that I had in mind is an English readership. Whether they were Manipuri, Indian, or in England. People who read books in the English language. In fact, I had a discussion with my friend Belinda Danoa, who teaches in Ambedkar University. And I said a translation in English is a work of English literature. And it has to work as a work of English literature. And she said, no, it's a book of Indian literature in English. I said, well, you're being very semantic about this thing. And we kind of, we're all friends. So if I had translated it literally, it would mean a lot. In fact, I get this question a lot from Manipuris because Sanatombi is a very big name here.
Yes.
There are many girls called Sanatombi also.
Yeah, true.
It means what? Little daughter?
Little daughter.
Yeah.
Golden little daughter.
Yeah, little gold nugget, So that resonance will not happen with the English reader, English language reader. Sanatombi will just be another name.
Another name. Yes.
Another foreign name. I didn't want to turn off people from the book with strange names. We know Binodini itself is a strange name.
Yes, sir.
Manipur, no one knows about Manipur. We're talking about a forgotten war of the British Raj. This book actually helped revive an interest in. And half the story of Boro Sahib, Ongbi, Sanatombi is the Boro Sahib, the big Sahib, and Sanatombi. One is an Asian woman, the other is a British man, right? So I had to convey the two. It's a love story.
Yeah,
so I had
from
to
the
convey
global point of view.
the global point of view that there's a man and then there's a girl,
And
so
it's a
the
love
princess and the political agent, and that's where the love story. That's why the book is not a literal translation, even starting from the title.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Just staying in the translation realm, people say, things are lost in translation. So I want to ask you, are there some important elements which got lost in translation and you could not do anything about it? And in the next question, I want to ask if there were elements which were gained in translation.
Interesting. The second part interests me a lot. The first one, yes, I've been asked this question before. A lot are lost in translation. Especially the poetry quoted. They say poetry is what is lost in translation.
True.
It's the most difficult. In fact, it's impossible. You have to write another poem to translate a poem, I think. But the other problem is that Boro Sahib Ongbi Sanatombi is a work of contemporary Manipuri literature written in modern Manipuri, what we know as Maithilon Manipuri, right? We call it Maithilon, outside people call it Manipuri. Both of them are acceptable, like Nihon, Jin, and Japanese. The Japanese themselves call themselves Nihon Jin, right? So, it's a very textured book. It is a very modernist book in terms of language and techniques used. She was a very globally exposed person in terms of literature. She translated Maxim Gorky, being a lefty in her late teens and early 20s.
Interesting.
Before she turned 25. She had translated already.
Incredible.
I'm still trying to find it because I remember seeing it. Khaidim Pramodini Devi had written it in a beautiful handwriting because my mother is chaotic, right? She loved Amrita Shergill, she loved Virginia Woolf. 1930, late 30s, when she was growing up, was a time, the heady period of the nationalist movement. Imagine growing up at a time when the newspapers talk about Gandhi and Tagore in the headlines. Imagine what it was like to be a young, smart person, right? So this was something that she had kind of grown up with, and so she wrote this book in a very multi-layered way, but even the use of the language, it employs, I counted 6 different languages. I had to iron them all like undesirable wrinkles on the page and smoothen it out to produce a book in English.
Okay.
There's Manipuri, there's old Manipuri, Aribalon, especially in the poetry. There's English, there is Hindi, there's broken Hindi, there's Bangla, even Sanskrit. That's 7, right?
Yeah, I lost count. That's a lot, yeah.
And so there's 7 different languages that Binodini wrote in this book. And there's an 8th one, and this is only a language that only Binodini could have written, and that is, we have I believe, Shobna, the term is sociolect, a language that's spoken only in the court.
Court language.
Court language. Not just court language of good manners, but within the family of the court, how they asked each other, have you brushed your teeth today, right? They have a different way of saying things. And Boro Sahib Ongbi Sanatombi employs that. And no one but Binodini could have written that language.
Okay. So coming to that, so no one but Binodini could have written that language. So can it be also say that no one but Mr. L. Somiroy could have translated that, being a
Oh, no.
part of.
Lots of people can translate it.
But what is the advantage of a son translating a mother's novel? What is the advantage you had?
The advantage is that I grew up with the novel swirling around me in different stages of creation, number one. Number two, she always made me translate stuff. But she never told me that she liked my translations either. You know, she's very dismissive, you know. Princesses are very cold people, you know. They're not very demonstrative with their affections and so on. They take everything for granted. It's been offered to them. So anyone could have done that. But I did have a lot of insight into her because, can I say something which no one has said so far, but I think is evident to
yes,
you?
Please, yes, please, yeah.
Sanatambi's story is Binodini's story. You see parallels, so many parallels. In fact, one reviewer said, the book is a dialogue between Binodini and Sanatambi. Very interesting book that way. So, yes, I know my mother's voice. I can hear my mother's voice. And she was full of mischief. In fact, I was telling Shobna yesterday evening, because Tangi offered me a little piece of kansubi, which I'd put as a gift for my delegates. So I said, this is called kansubi. In the novel, Borosai Ongi Sanatambi, Maxwell goes with Komdon Sana, the younger sister, and she says, here, eat this, to her brother-in-law. And she says, I don't want to eat that dirty little girl, you know, whatever, where have your hands been? You know, what is it? Kansubi. And he says, kasubi.
Yeah.
And then she laughs and says, like, you, a dirty old man, whatever, you know, you don't even know the word kansubi. So there's a joke in Manipuri, right? How do I get this into English?
Exactly.
Kansubi, kasubi,
yeah.
Rhyming,
Yeah.
right? So
it becomes an internal joke.
It's an internal joke. It's also a dirty joke, right?
It is. Yeah.
So then I had to translate it as, here, what is it? It's a cookie. And the guy says, nookie?
Yes.
Which is basically making out, right? And so we had to find things like that.
Okay.
And I know people and incidents that, the real life incidents that went into the book.
Okay, so.
And I know Binodini's voice.
So that is the
That is the
advantage you
advantage,
have.
yeah.
So we were talking about Sanatambi, who's the heroine of the novel, and Binodini, who's the author, and you, sir, the translator. So I want to know, and you know, we see Binodini as a feminist. And as a reader, I see Sanatambi as a feminist too, you know, in the way that she held her agency. And I see you as a feminist as well. So who is the most ardent feminist of the three of you?
The funniest thing is that Binodini said, I'm not a feminist.
Yes.
Even though she's the greatest feminist.
Yes.
And what she meant by this, because people, you know, a lot of artists don't talk directly like us. They speak in their own way. Even Guru Pongane, he speaks in his own way, as an artist. I mean, even though he shares the language of our people, there's a certain artist way of speaking and thinking, you know.
So.
That's why he came up with the idea of a song. I mean, not everyone creates like this on the spot, but he's an artist, you know. And the reason she said she was not a feminist was that this was said in the 1970s. I heard her many times, and that is because she did not like the easy adoption of Western ideas by Manipuri people.
Okay.
It was her way of saying, you should know who you are first before trying to become a feminist. You don't even know what feminism is, which is based on a Western thing that's coming out. Basically, 1970s was when Ms. magazine was coming out. Gloria Steinem was very famous. She made it to the cover of Time magazine and all that. And so when she said, I'm not a feminist, is that she did not want the easy adoption of Western ideas.
Okay.
And because she went to Tagore's Shantiniketan, she did not want to be classified and pigeonholed by any ism. She came out of communism. I asked her one time, were you a communist? No, I was not a communist. But you tell this to any artist, are you a secular humanist? Are you this? Are you that? They will all deny it, even they may be, because they don't want to be categorized and labeled by other people. They want the freedom of the artist. And that's the reason why. But obviously, women adore her, right? She was the first person who kicked out her husband out of the house for adultery. She became an immediate heroine to young women in Manipur, immediately. No one had done that before.
Yes, yeah, so we spoke about feminism of the heroine, the author, and the translator. We were talking earlier about how Binodini wrote the book, and you took that and ran to the extreme. I mean, you brought it out in so many formats. Binodini wrote the book in Manipuri, in Bengali script. The book has its own version in Maitai Meek. The book has been translated by Mr. Somi Roy in English. And the book has an e-version also. Now, the book is coming out in an audio format via Audible. What do you feel about it?
Well, it's kind of
coming out as in Audible format. And also, like in the same line, I want to ask how far Audible books are in the spectrum of oral literature in tandem with the festival.
It's really weird because The Princess and the Political Agent, which is the name of the title in translation, the translated book is called The Princess and the Political Agent. It came out in the first phase within the first 3 months of the pandemic. We had the pandemic in March 2020, March, April, May, June. It came out in June. And we were already trying to publish it when all the paper merchants and everyone was shutting down. That first 6-8 months of the pandemic, we were seeing peacocks on the roads in Bombay.
So,
Delhi people could see the stars for the first time.
Yes, sir.
In 50 years.
Pollution fading.
And no one knew what to do and how long this was going to be, whether we should get shots and all that. So instead of coming out with the hardback first, and then the paperback, and then the e-book as in Kindle, we went the other way. Penguin actually asked me, do you think people will buy it as an e-book? In Manipur especially, what would they think? And I said, yeah, I think they will. I took a spot and I just called, I won 5 volunteers in the survey, you, and you. And I asked them, what do you think? They said, yeah, I think people buy it. And so it did. It actually climbed to the top of the Amazon historical fiction and ebook the first few months. It's quite popular, the book. And so now it is going to be an audio book. Okay. For those of you who don't listen to audiobooks, why don't we play a clip first?
Yeah, we can have a clip of the audiobook.
And then this is what I recorded at the end of last year, and audible.com, which is now an Amazon company, is releasing the book. It's a Penguin production of my translation. And it's my own reading, and I'll tell you more about that later. Yeah.
So we'll play it now.
Please, you want to play the 7th chapter? Just a few minutes, we'll tell you when to stop.
Chapter 7. The war was over.
It's very hard recording an audiobook. And I was sick in Delhi. Because of this after we finished that program together, Ezekiel, at UNESCO, you went off to warm Swaziland, and I was stuck in polluted, cold Delhi. I felt sick, And you can hear a little bit of the cold in my voice also. But I really enjoyed making it.
Like when we read audio, we're listening to audiobooks, but we usually say that I'm reading an audiobook, right? So what advantage does audiobooks have? What do you think? What advantage of audiobooks have than print versions? Or
For
just
me,
something lost?
because I have very bad eyes, it's always good
Bad eyes.
to be able to rest my eyes and listen to something.
That's a big advantage.
Big
I
advantage.
didn't
And
even
secondly,
think of.
what we call the digital natives generation,
Yes.
millennials and so on, they read everything on the iPhone. 90%, you know. So no one reads books, no one reads papers, nothing. They're all just listening, reading. So they're very into the technology, and this audiobooks and podcasts are the most important new ways of delivering literature now.
Chapter 7.
Here we go.
Okay.
The
here's
war
the
was over.
clip.
The war between Manipur and the British. The war that brought Manipur's sovereignty to an end. How did that happen? The people and the princes had not believed it would come to this. But the princes of Manipur did not seem to have remembered that a house divided against itself cannot stand. The powerful British did not let it go so easily after the palace guards had cut off the heads of the white men. They attacked from 3 directions: the Kohima contingent, the Silchar contingent, the Tamu contingent. A man who had come with the Silchar contingent raised the Union Jack at Kangla Fort. He was Major H. St. P. Maxwell. When Jasumati heard that Chief Commissioner J.W. Quinton of Assam was coming, because of the upheaval over the throne of Manipur, she came running to Sanatombi and reported, "Sanatombi, your sovereign father will be coming back. They say that he will be coming with the Komeson Sahib this time. They say the throne will be given back to him. By the grace of Lord Govinda, we will be able to see your father." It was true. It was indeed believed that Quinton would be bringing Surchandra with him. But the information turned out to be wrong. He was coming to capture Prince Koireng alive. It turned out that he was coming with a plan to annex Manipur. The Meitei soldiers fought for a fairly long time. The good and the bad, the weak and the strong, all stepped up, saying, "I will fight too, I will fight too." But how were they to know that it would be as a creek against the ocean? How could the backward soldiers of a tiny country stand up to the highly trained soldiers of the British? On top of that, many ignorant people held the Meitei soldiers back. Along with Pauna, Yenkhoiba, and his lordship, the chieftain of Yaisku, many others died, scattered, or fled. News came from the palace, one after the other. News of the attacks by the British. Prince Koireng was not well at this time, but he had no time to be sick. Even as he commanded the war, the king called the learned to read the signs from the gods. The astrologer said, "It is but 5 days until the ill-boding grip of Saturn is released." After hearing the words of the astrologer, just as the Divine Majesty was about to offer a feast to Lord Govinda, news arrived. The
We can stop
British
now.
were advancing upon the palace from 3 directions.
Thank you.
The ladies of the palace
There was a beautiful clip. I already
Thank
read the book, but hearing it, in this version it's a whole new experience. So one thing as a reader, which I like to do is, sometimes I listen to the audiobook and read the print. That's also a good experience, and especially like it gets imprinted and you don't forget also. And it's nice, and especially when the author themselves or the translator themselves does the audio recording, it's more fun. It's more personal. So yeah, that's why I want to ask you, Tamo, how was the experience of recording this book? How long
You
did
know,
it
the
take
thing
and
is,
everything?
I would have preferred to have. I would have preferred to have had a woman reading. That was my first choice. And my second choice was a Manipuri woman reader. Well, actually, that's the first. My ideal reader would have been a Manipuri woman for this book. We tried very hard, and I talked to several people from the worlds of literature and theater, And it just didn't work out. The funny thing is that a lot of people in the Northeast and in Manipur who speak English now have a very American accent.
Okay, sir.
I think from the exposure to social media.
For globalization.
Globalization. And I don't mind a little bit of the British accent. I love the Manipuri English accent. That is really what I really wanted, you know, which is different from the regular Indian English accent, yeah. But we couldn't do it. And I said, finally, let me do it, Penguin. And they, of course, latched onto the fact that, oh, it's really good selling point for us to have, they're only looking for the business angle, to have the author, the translator do that, that gives them a lot. And then I went into it. I was too busy to think about it, to worry about it, but then it was an exhilarating experience, except for the fact that I was not well. One became a performer, you know. And before I left, I discussed this with Shyam Sharma, theatre director, friend of Binodini, film director, and Ichiroma, my neighbor, actress, performed in all the radio plays. And Ichiroma is very smart. She said immediately, it's different from a radio play, you know?
It is.
And it's not like that, she said. But there has to be some acting. More than that, she did not say.
Some voice modulation, some tonal change, surprise element.
You know, she hasn't done it, but she knows that if you're going to be reading prose, you read it differently. A dialogue is read differently. A poem is differently. She's so experienced with it. She knew. And I guess Sham also said that. You have to give some emotional inflection, but not too much, he said. You have to give room for the listener's emotional space to be created for them to respond. So I took these very philosophical, general words of advice, and I jumped into it. And boy, was it tough.
It was tough. How many days it took, Tom?
It took me 8 days.
8 days.
But we taped from 10 o'clock in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. We stopped every couple of sentences. There's something wrong with my voice. They can hear the spit in my mouth. I mean, they were so detailed. Especially, and they said there are several audiobook companies in India, but Audible being the world's leading audiobooks producer, and Penguin being the world's biggest publisher, they got together. So they have to have very high quality sound recording. So I was very thankful to my friend Rupam, who was at What's Next Studio, and the engineers there. They were very, very meticulous. And then they took another month to clean it all up. And what you see now, what you hear now, is going to be ultimately 9 hours,
9 hours
of listening time.
Oh, yeah, to the final few questions. Ours is a festival of oral literature. So in this context, how far the Audible book, Audible version of The Princess and the Political Agent is, valid, reasonable?
Well, the thing is that it's the first audiobook from here, right?
It is.
And
Congratulations.
Thank you.
On that. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a whole new experience. And also it's it's coming from two very big companies, right?
Yes.
So even if people don't know Binodini or Manipur or the book, just because it happens to be a British Raj story produced by Penguin, lots of people read it. You know, so people come to reading with different levels of exposure and background information. Some people know what Manipur is, what the British were doing here. Some people don't, depending on where they live and what age group they are and all that, you know. But what interests me about the audiobook in particular is that I was doing it at a time when I was already working on the listener. I've been working on the listener for 4 years now.
Okay, Dhamma.
You know, Santila and Paul have been with me since the first year. Okay? And
6 years.
6 years. And Ezekiel, you know, we started talking about this. So I got more and more, the more I spent time on this, the more I got interested in the transmission of oral literature, that it has to be performed in order to be heard. You cannot have oral literature without performance. So now that I find myself performing this book, right?
Yes.
I mean, I know every sentence, every word of this. So it was really, that's the reason Penguin wanted to work with me, because I made about 10 or 11 drafts of this translation. It took me 2 years. So I knew the book. So I knew what was the next sentence. That was the easy part, really. But the question of what is oral literature, and in conversation with now my partners like Professor Umarani Papuswamy or Mr. from CIIL, the Central Institute of Indian Languages, and Mr. Hezekiel Dlamini from UNESCO, the head of the UNESCO office in New Delhi, and with Sentila Younger and with Shobna Chelaya. I mean, she's also been by my side on this for a long time now. It's really, then I got interested in what is oral literature? Would this count as oral literature? It was written.
Yes, that's my question. Would this count as oral literature? It is oral, it is literature. Is it oral literature?
Short answer, I don't know, I'm not a scholar. I did test this out, and as a result of which, we had our last session for the festival is called What is Orality?
Okay.
I kind of use the word orality. It's not a very common word in conversation, but I thought of this as a festival of oral literature first, and then I found that it's more performative. And Sangeet Natya Academy and our friends in New Delhi, Anish Rajan and Helen Acharya, they supported the program at UNESCO. But at the same time, Sahitya Academy didn't seem to agree that what we are doing here is literature. And then I got my Northeast hackles up and I said, what do you mean? You know, you would think of Gulzar's poetry as literature, but why not Mr. Chamroy's lyrics for Reuben Bashanga, for instance. So that was just my political play in my own mind. But the question then became, and I consulted Uja Rajketan from the literature division, oral literature division of Manipur University. And I'm so sorry he can't be here because he lost his mother quite recently. And he said, no, oral literature must not have an author. What do you think? Let me ask you, what do you think?
I don't know. It should be okay.
So, okay, so that is the received canon, that oral literature does not have an author.
I don't want to agree to it because it's kind of related to my next question. You know, for us in Northeast India, Manipur and Nagaland, Mizoram, and when we talk of Manipur, you know, apart from the valley, the hill areas, oral history is very important in historical reconstruction. Oral history is a part of oral literature. And when I, you know, this question, because Bor Sahib Ongdi Sanatombi, or The Princess and the Political Agent, is a historical fiction. So I always categorized it as a part of oral history. Because it's not like history in totality, but you can take out elements of oral history from it. So that was my question. My next question to you, Tamo. Do you think this book is an important source of history for the Indian history period? You know,
No,
I'm taking into consideration the oral
Binodini was very categorical. This is not a work of history.
Not a word of history.
No,
But can we take out elements of...
She said this is not history and this is not biography. She is very, very categorical about this. But she also mentions that it's based on memory. Sanatombi's portraiture comes from her mother's memories of Sanatombi, because Sanatombi had died. She only died at the age of 32 or something, very young. So it was her mother, Maharani Dhanamanjari's stories and recollections about meeting Sanatombi, the kind of when she talks about putting a red chili in her ear and walking into the High Commission, the Viceroy's preparations. That was my grandmother's actual visual experience. She saw Sanatombi do that. Only thing that she was visiting my grandmother, and on the way she plucked a red chili and hung it on her ear and came and walked in. She's a woman of great confidence, you know.
Yeah, so when we first open the first pages of the book, we see chronology, and that makes it from a history, researcher point of view. I found it
Well,
very interesting that
that was
chronologically
because-
it's presented chronologically.
That was because Penguin wanted it, and I agreed. Because you see, the book is very modernist. The time shifts in it. It's not a straightforward linear narrative. It goes back and forth.
Yes, true.
It's like a wave of memories, and it's structured like that. And gradually it ebbs, and she dies. So the rhythm of the book coincides with the time shifts. It's a interesting technique she was using, and so it was very important to kind of keep what we call the period fidelity, and to recognize that sometimes you'll come across something that seems anomalous and out of the time frame that the chapter is about. Like, for instance, she's in the first chapter, she's lying in bed, and she says, and then the dialogue is like, boom, boom, boom. And she says, what was that? And the maid says, that must be the gunfire from the palace. And then he writes, Sanantami seems to have thought it was the sound of cannons. Mm-hmm. She remembers the war. That's the first time mention of the war. The war comes 3 chapters later. So Vinodini actually demands a very attentive reader. It's not a very easy novel to read. And you're meant to hold that information in your head without arguing with her, because she will come and explain it to you later. That's the thing. So in using all the historical fiction conventions and narratives, and also pushing the envelope as far as Manipuri literature goes, it is not really history. Although one time I picked her up she was the secretary of the Dance Academy, and I brought her back for lunch, and she started laughing, remembering something. And I said, what happened? She said, funny thing happened at court yesterday. I said, what? She says, apparently my book was produced as historical evidence. And she laughed her head off, because she said, I will never tell anyone which parts of these are history and which parts of these are my imagination and creation. That's none of my business to tell them.
Yes, that's true, sir. Coming to the final question, sir, we must be having a lot of future translators and future authors and future audiobook readers here. So any advice for them? Any advice from me?
Oh no, I only do things for the first time, then I move on to do something else. Milan Kundera said, his first book was supposed to be called The Planet of Inexperience, because everyone does everything for the first time. We all do everything from inexperience. I have nothing to advise you. Just do it and have some fun.
So that's a great advice in itself, sir. And with that, we will finish today's session.
Thank you.
And you can finish it with some last words, sir. Thank you.
Last words? Yeah. We are interested in orality, and technology. I wanted to subtitle this festival Literature, Music, and Technology, not culture. Because in the 1920s, the radio was invented already. When the 1920s, radio transmission became popular, and the BBC got into it, or the BBC Radio Worldwide Service and all that. The radio play came up. Authors like Samuel Beckett were writing for the radio play. Vinodini also wrote radio play, her favorite art form, literary form. She wrote songs to be heard. A radio play is not meant to be heard, and it's not meant to be seen. It's meant to be heard, right? And so an audiobook now, not that radio was killed more or less by popular radio, by television, right? So the radio play went down, and now we see a revival called the audiobook and the audio play. So the role of technology, even though academics rightfully may say that this is without authorship and all that, a festival, since we are not an academic conference in itself, we are interested in how technology pushes the envelope, makes us question boundaries. Is it really true that if you have an author, you can't have oral literature? Well, then why did Bob Dylan, who wrote songs to be heard, get the Nobel Prize for literature? So let me finish this with my comment with by quoting Bob Dylan. Are song lyrics literature? They asked him.
Must be.
And he said, it is and it is not.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.